Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the American Academy of Diplomacy virtual interview series. I'm your host, Kyla Denwood, and I hope everyone is staying safe during this time. The purpose of this series is to share the experiences of Academy members with students and the general public in hopes of supporting the Academy's mission of strengthening appreciation and understanding of U.S. diplomacy and foreign policy, and hopefully inspire the next generation to explore opportunities in the field. If you haven't already, please follow the American Academy of Diplomacy across all of our social media platforms for the latest diplomacy and foreign policy updates. Today, we are joined by Ambassador Harry K. Thomas Baker. Ambassador Thomas is the QBS Learning Board Chairperson. He served as ambassador to Zimbabwe, the Philippines, and Bangladesh. He retired in March 2018 with the rank of Career Minister after more than 3 decades in the Foreign Service. Ambassador Thomas also served as Executive Secretary and Special Assistant to Secretary Condoleezza Rice, Director General of the Foreign Service, Director for South Asia at the National Security Council, and Director of the Operations Center. Ambassador Thomas speaks Spanish, Hindi, and Bangla. He is a graduate of the College of the Holy Cross and holds a master's degree from Columbia University. He's a member of the Holy Cross Board of Trustees. Thank you for joining us today, Ambassador Thomas.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Kyla.
Great, we'll go ahead and get started. So my first question is, what sparked your interest in international affairs and diplomacy?
Well, I'm different than my colleagues. I needed a job. I was working in New York as an urban planner for a former Foreign Service officer, and he told me about the Foreign Service. So when I went to the library, as we had to do in those days, no internet, I looked and I saw that USAID was doing international development work where I was doing local development work in the South Bronx. And the Central Intelligence Agency looked great, exciting. You know, I grew up in the area, James Bond movies, and Flint. So I applied to both and they rejected me. So our agency was needing funding, so I just took the Foreign Service exam.
So you said you came from, local development. So what was one of your first international experiences that you remember? And did you have a lot of experience before you joined this sort of international career?
No, and that's why I am so supportive of others joining the Foreign Service. I had never traveled overseas. I had never spoken a foreign language. My first trip overseas was my first assignment. If I can do it, others can do it. And that's why I'm so encouraging of women and minorities, because I'm coming from Harlem to do this. A lot of them already have some international travel, but even if you don't, you can pass an exam.
I find that coming from Harlem, you had a lot of international experiences at home, like in New York.
No international experience except for my male relatives who had been in the military, and they, their stories were limited, but they told us. But I love to read. I loved encyclopedias. I followed the news about history and international affairs.
Great. So moving on to your early Foreign Service career. Throughout our Academy interview series, we've heard a lot from many ambassadors who didn't pass the Foreign Service exam the first time. What was your experience with the exam and how did you study for it? And did you pass on the first try?
Yes, I did. So I'm a minority. Yes, I passed the first time. I remember I took the exam in December 1984 in New York City. First question I remember was, when was the Battle of Hastings, 1066? It was a SAT type exam or GRE. And then the orals were March 17th, St. Patty's Day, 1983. And we were given a choice of DC or Boston. I went to school in New England, so I knew to stay away from Boston on St. Patty's Day, simply. So I chose coming to Virginia for the exam. But the person who had told me about the Foreign Service, Edward J. Loeb, the way he ran the NGO that I worked with, we had to do a lot of papers, a lot of memos, all this kind of stuff. He quizzed us. So unbeknownst to me, I really did well on the orals because of the way we worked. So I'm always in his debt. He was a Yale and Yale Law School graduate, really good person.
Thank you. My next question is, you did mention that your first foreign service assignment was your first time abroad. So what were some of your duties during this first assignment, and was it what you expected when you were exploring a foreign service career?
I had no idea what to expect. I went overseas as we all do, as a vice consul. We had taken a course called Con Gen Roslin to prepare us to do consular work. I went to Lima after studying Spanish, and you have basically rudimentary Spanish after 20 weeks. But working a visa line was an introduction to the Foreign Service, where you go to work and there are a couple of thousand people outside each morning to greet you and your colleagues. But we did non-immigrant, immigrant visas as well as American citizen services. And you start off with non-immigrant visas. The best thing about that is there were 9 other junior officers, and we bonded and became friends for life.
So what were some of the lessons that you learned early in your foreign service career that helped pave the way for your ambassadorship?
Well, A, stick close to those friends. B, the consul general and one of the 2 consuls were the most incompetent people I ever met. I didn't realize they were incompetent at that time because I had no reference point. But you can tell when somebody's a good or a bad manager, a leader or not. The person told me that he was inviting everybody to the beach, but not me because real Americans tan. He also said that I had been investigated along with a Foreign Service National for fraud, the visa line. He called me to tell me I was cleared, but he thought I was guilty because everybody he met in the Foreign Service who had been engaged in malfeasance was Black. The other person was not a racist at all. He was just somebody who was incompetent. You know, if people were sick, he would just sit in his office, learn how to do his computer while we tried to do all the work and learn, and we were not fully understanding our job at that time. So my message always is you learn as much from bad bosses as good bosses, and just hold that in and don't repeat their missteps.
Yeah, that's some great advice. Moving on to sort of your later career as an ambassador, what was one of your most memorable experiences that you had throughout your ambassadorships?
Well, in the Philippines, Gloria Steele from USAID approached me to tell me there were over 4,000 women dying each year from postpartum bleeding. They could not afford, the hospitals they went to didn't have the drip, or the midwives couldn't afford to give it to them. But we could solve this. And we worked with an American pharmaceutical company. We came up with a shot where we could give it away and anybody could administer it. But the story is we saved over 4,000 lives. And you know what happens when mothers are deceased early in their children's lives? All kinds of other problems that follow children for their lives. So I'm most proud of that during my career. In Bangladesh, I was a political officer. I had to learn a lot about economics and trade because I guarantee, Kyla, someplace in your house you got clothing from Bangladesh. There wasn't much child labor except in the shrimp industry, which Americans consume a lot. Rights for women were important. Getting women to those factories was important because there were Islamists who wanted to keep them at home, and working to get them equitable pay. But I'll tell you, when I first got there, within my first week, I went on a trip, and the US Navy band was there. Bangladeshis were playing this song. I said, I know this song, but they were just instrumental, and they were singing in Bengali, which I spoke that, but I know the song is called Amra Kobo Joy. And after the national anthem, it's the most important song for Bangladeshis. It's the song they brought home from the United States, the students in the early 70s when they were fighting East Pakistan for independence, as East Pakistan versus West Pakistan. And that song is We Shall Overcome, but it's in Bengali, and most Bangladeshis don't know Dr. King, don't know We Shall Overcome, but to them, that is an important song. And what an incredible achievement with the civil rights movement. And I dare to say most people in the civil rights movement didn't know the effect that they had indirectly on another's freedom.
So often the title of ambassador is sort of a lofty idea in people's heads rather than an actual profession. So I was hoping you could help us bring it back down to earth a little bit and describe some of the duties of an ambassador that most people don't expect.
Well, number one is to keep all Americans safe and secure who are visiting the country and living in the country. That's why we're there, and you work with the people on your team from various agencies to make sure that Americans are safe. The other thing is that you work to sell American products, and the agency that you were interning with this summer was very helpful in helping American business persons level the playing field in a field that is often laden with corruption and landmines. So I don't think people know how much the State Department and other parts of our embassies do to sell American products.
That's an interesting aspect of the job. I didn't realize that you guys were not only keeping people safe, but also sort of salespeople for the United States.
Yeah, yes, we work with them closely with American businesses.
Awesome. So you served as a Director General for the Foreign Service from 2007 to 2009. What were some of your responsibilities in this role?
Well, you're Director General of the Foreign Service and Head of Human Resources. You go in there knowing a lot about the Foreign Service, but you're working with the civil service personnel system also, as well as the personnel systems in all of the countries we have embassies. And you have to work under local labor laws. So the laws in China are different than Tanzania or Peru, and you have to know those. So making sure we were following the laws in each country, respecting the laws was something we had to learn and make sure we were continuing to follow. The biggest thing we did was recruitment, increase the size of the Foreign Service. And President Bush invited a team that worked for Dr. Rice to come to the White House, not White House, Camp David, my one and only time going to Camp David. Best cheeseburgers in the world, thanks to Bill Clinton, no joke. But we went up there to brief him, Vice President Cheney and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs on the importance of increasing the Foreign Service, why it needed to be increased. We had over 22% of our colleagues serving in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places where they had to go without their families, and we were losing people also. And for the civil service, it's trying to expand opportunities under a different system. In an era where there were so few minorities in senior executive service. But the best thing that we did that we want to tell young people, and I hope they bring it back, was we did paid internships for students at colleges and universities that traditionally did not produce foreign service officers. So, I teach at Yale, and we have a lot of people that come from the Foreign Service. Yale. However, we went to Hamilton College, we went to Ohio Wesleyan, we went to Delaware State. Dr. Rice asked us to go to her father's alma mater, Johnson C. Smith. We went to Langston in Oklahoma, smaller HBCU. We went to Wiley College, where there was a scene of the Great Debaters movie. And we gave those kids internships, and at that time, $500 a week. Did 16 schools. And for some of the kids, like at Wiley, they didn't have the funds to even get to DC. So we had to work with their alumni chapters, Winston-Salem State. And the families were so happy to either host these kids for the summer, part of the summer, or help collect funds so that they could stay in hostels. These are not level playing fields. And we wanted them all to take the Foreign Service exam so that we could see where they would be and where they needed. But the lawyers said having them take it in the building would give them an undue advantage. And we couldn't, but that's bogus. You know, that is a disgrace. If you take some kid out of Wiley, Texas, bring him to DC, sit him in a room and exam and say that's an advantage, you're crazy. It shows your blind side because these kids are going to be scared as hell. And you already know they weren't in the 99th percentile. But those are barriers that people with advantages don't realize that they create for people that don't come from those types of situations. And we wanted to have people from HBCUs that didn't give a lot of kids to the Foreign Service also.
Yes, very, very important. Thank you for doing that and taking the initiative on that. And what advice would you give to students looking to pursue a career in the Foreign Service?
Same thing your parents or grandparents would tell you. Work hard, study. Study languages. I was fortunate to learn, but study languages beforehand, study cultures, travel. And most of all, be kind. Be a mentor to people. There's so many people who kiss on the way up and kick on the way down, or forget about people who help them all the way. Don't be that person. But it's a great career.
Great, thank you so much. And I think we do have time for one more question.
Sure.
So when you retired in 2018, you celebrated almost a more than 30-year career in the Foreign Service. What were some of the evolutions or major changes that you've seen in the Foreign Service during your tenure at the State Department?
Definitely IT. We used to type cables on carbon, paragraph at a time. The office management specialist would retype it, give it to the IT person. We're not the best and we need to improve, but just how we do things. The cables would come in when you were overseas. It went to the counselor in your office and he or she would go through them. And then when he deigned to give them to you in the afternoon is when you get to look at them. Now everybody gets them right on their computer. And these people did not want to give that up. They thought that's their power, their control. You know, you can't be looking backwards. Always have to be looking forward. And it didn't end the world that everybody gets the cables now on their computer. So IT has been the biggest change as far as I am concerned, and as well as security protocols. You know, you used to be able to drive right up to the front of the State Department, park on the street. On Saturdays, you could park in the semicircle where all the foreign diplomats come if you had to come into work. So unfortunately, we're not going to go back from that. I would have expected that we would have had more minorities and women in the Foreign Service. That number is basically static, especially for African Americans. That's a disappointment.
That was our final question. So thank you so much for joining us today, Ambassador Thomas. This has been another installment of the American Academy Ambassador Interview Series. For more information on U.S. diplomacy and foreign policy, please check out our website at academyofdiplomacy.org and our social media platforms. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.